paid leave policies. And we're really happy to have you with us. I'm Jennifer Morales. I am Family Values at Work's Director of Movement Learning and Culture Change, and here with friends from A Better Balance and Gender Justice, as well as California Work and Family Coalition. And I don't know if we were planning to have others introduce. Do you want to introduce yourselves at this point?
I can quickly introduce folks just before I hand it off, if that's okay, and then I'll let everybody introduce themselves with greater detail once we get to their portions of the discussion. Well, I'll go ahead if Jennifer, if it's okay for me to.
Yes, please do. Sorry.
No worries at all. Well, thank you so much for that. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. Today's learning session is made possible by the work of the Family Justice Network, which is a collaborative cross-movement learning and strategizing hub for inclusive family definitions that's co-anchored by A Better Balance and Family Values at Work. And we are excited today to be joined by Serena Davey, a communications associate at A Better Balance, who will share more about our family definition work, including This Is My Family. Megan Peterson, the executive director of Gender Justice, which was a champion behind Minnesota's inclusive paid family and medical leave victory this session. And Jared Caceres, the communications director of the California Work and Family Coalition, which has led the incredible multi-year effort to expand family definitions in California, including their essential role in getting the first paid sick leave law with an inclusive family definition enacted in Los Angeles in 2016. We now have 7 state paid family and medical leave programs and 13 state and local paid sick time laws on the books that ensure that workers can care for their loved ones regardless of their legal or biological relationship. So I'm really excited to hear more from our speakers today. But before I hand it over to them, I also wanted to note that we hope today's conversation will spark ideas for how storytelling can play a role in your current and future advocacy efforts. We know there are a number of exciting paid family and medical leave campaigns that'll really be important to watch, especially coming into this next year, including Michigan, where a comprehensive paid family and medical leave bill has been introduced. New Mexico, where this short session promises to be a really exciting one following the passage of a comprehensive paid family and medical leave bill in the Senate last session, and Illinois, where partners continue to make progress on paid family and medical leave following the enactment of their paid time off law last session. And I'm seeing in the chat, Jennifer, you have a few more things to say, so I'll go ahead and pass it to you before we go ahead and pass it to Serena to get us started.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I just wanted to say that as each of our organizations is working on using storytelling as a way to fuel policy change that serves all families, we do always want to caution folks that storytelling can be extractive and transactional, or it can be movement building and affirming for the people who are part of the storytelling effort. So at Family Values at Work, we always remind each other that our storytellers are not a token. They're not something to be handed off as in a transactional nature. And so we try to really ground our story collection and use of storytelling in movement building and in leadership development, making sure that people are supported in their time, that everything is consensual, that they have opportunities to become more deeply engaged in the overall work, and that their lived expertise and leadership is honored in every way, including when possible with a financial stipend for their work. So just offering that as sort of like an ethical context for some of the things we're talking about. And then also I want to stress that storytelling isn't something that we have done as a movement just for the sake of storytelling. It really is the way that human beings make meaning about our lives and our communities. So, if something happens to my sister where she needs to take paid leave, that's not just a single incident, but my human brain is trying to connect it to a lot of other cases that I've heard of people needing paid leave. And those stories turn into a bigger narrative. So in this work, we are actually trying to move culture and move narratives so that all these stories together begin to shape a different way of thinking in our culture about the care economy that we all need, what a family is, and how to support those families. So just wanted to put those two contextual frames around what we're going to talk about today. And now back to Serena. Is it you?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that amazing intro, Cassandra and Jennifer, and thank you to everyone who's joining us today. I'm really excited to hold space for this conversation. My name is Serena Devi. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a Better Balances Communications Associate. And you can go to the next slide. But today we're going to be talking about communications and specifically storytelling-based communications. I think there's kind of this tendency sometimes to think of comms as this additional supplemental sort of nice to have in addition to actual policy change. But as we found through successful campaigns, communications is actually a critical part of facilitating policy change through facilitating cultural change. And is actually like a key component of that process and not just this nice promotional thing that we do in addition to our policy work. And so to start off, I want to introduce this concept of chosen family, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with this term. I'm sure many of you have experienced having chosen family firsthand. And we can go to the next slide. But this term you might have heard specifically used in relation to the LGBTQ community. In 1991, an American anthropologist named Kath Weston published this book called Families We Choose, Lesbians, Gays, Kinship. And it kind of codified that term as it relates to the LGBTQ community and was based heavily on research done amongst lesbian and gay people in the Bay Area. And you can see from the excerpts that I have here that chosen family historically has played a really critical role in caregiving and in meeting people's caregiving needs, specifically for the gay community and specifically during the HIV/AIDS epidemic, when people who maybe needed to be cared for maybe didn't have an existing relationship with their biological family or maybe had a complicated relationship with them. And so these kinship bonds really filled that gap and filled that need. And you can see from one of the excerpts here, from one of the participants in this research, in my family, all of us kids are godparents to each other's kids. We're very connected that way. By when I go to have a kid, I'm not going to have my sisters as godparents. I'm going to have people that are there around me that are gay, that are straight. I don't have that many straight friends, but certainly I would integrate them in my life. And then this sort of calls out the caregiving aspect. They would help me. They would babysit my child, like my kitty. I'm not calling up my family and saying, hey, mom, can you watch my cat? No, I call on my inner family, my community, to help me with my life. So you can see here that chosen family is really critical for meeting people's caregiving needs. But you can also see a little bit in one of these excerpts that chosen family is definitely not unique to the American LGBTQ community. It was not invented in the 90s with the publication of this book. Throughout human history in so many different cultures and contexts. And to this day, chosen family has played a really key role in people's lives. And so when we prioritize recognizing chosen family in our policies at a structural level, that is an intersectional approach to caregiving because there are so many different groups that have been marginalized throughout history that have relied on these kinship networks. And we can go to the next slide, which is a very non-comprehensive list of just when we think about a very normative, rigid definition of family, maybe you've heard it called the nuclear family, consisting of a heterosexual couple, a mother and a father who are married, who live under the same roof, and then maybe they have a few biological children who also live with them under this roof, and that's it. That is the extent of the nuclear family. And when I think about that personally, I don't know very many people whose families fit into that very narrow definition. It doesn't really reflect the reality of a lot of people's lives. And so when we think of people who break that mold and who would fall through the gaps of that definition, we have blended families, we have foster families, adopted children and adoptive parents, donor conceived children and their parents, especially multi-generational families, and especially young people who have caregiving needs and responsibilities. We at A Better Balance recently released a new series of resources, just to plug that, highlighting the importance of paid leave for young people, specifically in their late teens and early 20s, and how when you don't have access to supportive policies, your caregiving needs can actually impede your career growth and your education and have just lasting ramifications. So it's really important for young people as well. For people living in communal living arrangements with people who aren't related to them by blood, even non-nuclear extended family caregivers like uncles and aunts, grandparents, cousins, even adult siblings. Immigrants or anybody who lives far away from their biological family might rely on these networks to meet their needs. Unmarried couples, and just people who don't have close relationships with their biological family or who don't have access to them in times of need. And so, like I said, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but just some examples of people who sort of break that mold and would be left out of a super rigid definition of family in a policy. And we can go to the next slide. So now I want to talk a little bit about Colorado, and specifically Colorado's Family Act, which passed in 2020, and how storytelling played a role in making sure that policy was inclusive of all families. In 2020, Colorado passed this law via a ballot initiative, and they were the first state to pass a statewide paid family and medical leave program this way. We at A Better Balance were really proud to have played a role in passing that program, as well as the state's paid sick time program, which passed that same year. And in making the case for this law and to emphasize the need for a paid family and medical leave policy that has an inclusive family definition, the campaign mobilized a lot of coalition partners to share and amplify these personal stories from people who would have been left out of an earlier version of that bill that had a flawed and rigid definition of family. And the storytellers made a point that including all families of all shapes and sizes was non-negotiable, especially in this time following a pandemic, during a pandemic, even when the campaign mobilized. So many people were already being forced to choose between their economic security and taking care of themselves and their loved ones. And it just was non-negotiable. There was no way that this could have passed without really, truly recognizing all families. And so if we go to the next slide, we have an example of a narrative shared by someone who some of you might know, Chris Garcia, an amazing advocate and a member of 9 to 5 Colorado's board, who was a really powerful spokesperson for both the Colorado law and for more broadly the need for a federal paid family and medical leave program. And Chris shared a really powerful story about the need to include LGBTQ families specifically in the definition that had been used in an earlier flawed version of the bill. And so you can see here in this excerpt, Chris writes, "The need for this benefit has touched my life many times, including after the birth of my child. When my son Jacob was born, he was in the NICU for the first weeks of his life. I returned to work 3 days after giving birth because my job as a manager was through a temp agency, and I was told I would lose my job if I was not at work that Monday. Me and my best friend, we were my son's only caregivers at this time. Unfortunately, with no family to show up and comfort him, all we had was our close friendship and each other. Under the current proposal, my best friend and I would not have qualified for paid family and medical leave." And so if we go to the next slide, we have another excerpt from the same narrative that specifically calls out and names the concept of chosen family. Chris writes, "Like us, many in the LGBTQ community rely on non-relatives in times of need. A financial relationship may or may not be there, but this is our chosen family, a network of mutual love and support. Communities of color, young adults, seniors, immigrants, and many low-wage workers are excluded from this program because of the definition of non-relative family." And so you can see here, Chris calls out the fact that these networks are not just important for the LGBTQ community, but as I've mentioned, for communities of color, young people, seniors, low-wage workers. And so because of that, this is a universal issue and a specific issue. And going to the next slide, just to zoom out a little bit for a more big picture national focus. Some of you might already be familiar with the This Is My Family campaign. If you aren't, we're going to be showing a video from the most recent round of videos we've put out as part of this campaign. And I'll give a bit more background in a moment, but we found that in making the case for how to make sure that our local and state and federal laws work for all families, sharing firsthand stories from families that break that mold is often very effective. And so just to give some background on this project and its ethos, this is My Family as a project of the Family Justice Network, convened by A Better Balance and Family Values at Work. We first started rolling out videos in this campaign in late 2021 with 3 pieces of what we call video portraits. Since then, we've released several more. And they all tell the stories of families who needed to take paid leave to care for one another, but weren't able to because of rigid family definitions. And the ethos here is that we can tap into these universal concepts of love and care and family, but also to show the anxiety of having to weigh your economic security and your job with needing to be there for those closest to you in times of need, whether that person is your child or your sibling or a chosen family member. And that showing these in video form where you can actually see people's faces and hear their voices and see their families sort of translates in a way that maybe reading a fact sheet or a text-based resource might not. We've also found that, when we're talking to a policy audience, we can use terms like inclusive family definitions and paid family and medical leave. And as an entry point, that can be kind of self-explanatory. However, for people who maybe haven't used these policies or who aren't super well versed in this area of policy, it might not be the most compelling entry point to the issue. However, when we're talking about this really specific type of policy, paid leave within a very specific area of law, it is a very universal issue because everyone experiences the need to care for someone or be cared for at some point in their life. Like, this is a very urgent issue and it's a very universal issue. And so, like I've said, when we hear people's voices and we see their faces talking about this can be super impactful for voters and for lawmakers. And this can facilitate cultural change, which can then lead to structural change. And just showing the real world human impact of these policies and also what a lack of access to these policies looks like can sort of help that translate. And so it's a powerful and accessible entry point to the issue. It's great to showcase families that break that cookie cutter mold. I think especially amidst all these legislative attacks against queer and trans families and gay and trans parents, showing these family units is especially important and valuable and something that we're really proud to do as part of this campaign. But yeah, that's a little bit of background about This Is My Family, and I'm going to pass it to Megan from Gender Justice Now, who's going to zoom back in a little bit and talk about some exciting work in Minnesota.
Thank you so much, and thanks for including me. It's so exciting to be here with advocates working nationally and at the state level on this particular issue, which is so important to us at Gender Justice. Our vision statement is there on the screen, but our mission is to advance gender equity through the law, through legal and policy advocacy. We work in Minnesota and now also North Dakota. We work across gender. We bring strategic and impact litigation. We do policy advocacy, coalition building, narrative and communications work, as well as, organizing. And anyway, we've tried to bring a lot of tools in our toolbox, and we work on things like paid family medical leave that some folks might think of as, traditionally like a women's rights issue. But we work on LGBTQ rights and liberation, as well as reproductive health rights and justice, and really see gender discrimination and stereotypes as the common root between all of those issues. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give a little grounding here on what our paid family medical leave program that we passed this year, this legislative session 2023, looks like and what it includes. So it covers 12 weeks of medical or family leave, or 20 weeks of medical and family leave combined in a year. And we're in the rulemaking and program setting up process right now, and workers will be able to benefit beginning January 1st of 2026. The program covers a lot of different medical and parental leave kind of aspects, and it's pretty broad. And some of the stories one of the stories I'm going to share helps to explain a little bit about why it was so important for us that, there be a particularly broad definition, not just of family, but also of pregnancy and what kind of qualifies around pregnancy. Go to the next slide. So who is eligible? So nearly all employees in Minnesota, including both private sector and state and local government workers. You need to have earned about $3,500 in the previous 12 months to qualify. And the great thing is that the clock doesn't start over if you change employers. You can bring those benefits with you even if you change employers in a year. And just a note on the progressive wage replacement, this was also really important. I mean, honestly, I would like to see these percentages go up. I think the hope is that employers will top these off with their own resources, but we did prioritize that the workers working, making the least amount of money had the greatest amount of coverage. And so it is a progressive approach. And, that helps to balance the need for lower income workers to receive as high as a possible percentage while hopefully, keeping program costs reasonable, especially because in our program, workers are contributing their own income into the program to fund the program. Next slide. So this was a huge coalition effort in Minnesota. It was a culmination of a decade of work by a large coalition. And we work, from progressive wage replacement to retaliation and anti-discrimination protections. Our coalition relied on storytelling to really highlight why each and every piece of the bill was important. Next slide. These are the list of the many organizations that were involved in this decade-long effort. And because we had such a large coalition and constituencies behind the bill, it meant we were able to share wide-ranging experiences from different communities of Minnesotans across the state about the importance of paid family medical leave. So this is the inclusive family definition that we included, and gender justice. In that big coalition, it became kind of our piece of the puzzle that we really focused on as an organization, representing very often LGBTQ folks and families. It was very important to us that the program respect chosen family and that it is critical for the quality of LGBTQ people in particular to have the same access to this program as other folks who might form their families in more normative ways. So, and as has already been noted, LGBTQ people in particular are more likely to experience estrangement from their families of origin, which is why it's very important. We also recognized the role that the pandemic played in demonstrating to everyone the urgent need for an inclusive definition of family. We saw the patchwork nature of our care systems and how important communities of all kinds have been to our survival. Who has the ability to be a caretaker at a given time has depended on many complex factors: time, health, work, flexibility, geographic proximity, and wealth. And we've had to consider who has already had COVID, who is healthy enough to put themselves at risk, who has vulnerable young children or immunocompromised loved ones at home. And it's very relevant. I'm on my last day of COVID right now, and I got it from my son, and did the juggle that, of course, so many of us know so well when it comes to needing to shift things around. So it's a good segue into the next slide, which is a little bit about my personal story, which we used a lot in our campaign. I testified frequently over several years, specifically on the family definition. It's me, my son many years ago, and my co-parent Wen on the right. So our bill's family definition recognizes the various ways Minnesotans build their family, and it includes mine. So a narrower definition would have left mine out. 12 years ago, my then partner Wen and I, welcomed our son Elias, but for the last 8 years, we have been committed and loving co-parents. We live separately, and we maintain a healthy and mutually supportive co-parent relationship. Wen's family of origin does not live in Minnesota, and if Wen were to face a serious illness or needed caretaking support, I would absolutely be there. And I think it's very reasonable to imagine that for the sake of our family, I would need to be able to take paid leave from work. So the paid family medical leave program we have now will support us and our son through a challenging time without having to worry about financial instability. Obviously, Wen and I are not married, we're not related by blood, and yet without question, we are each other's family, and we are a part of each other's chosen family. Our inclusive family definition respects and recognizes Minnesotans like us who have created their families in different or non-traditional ways. Next slide. And I also wanted to highlight one other example of a really powerful story that helped illustrate for legislators this session the importance of that broad definition of pregnancy. So, often when we're trying to pass policies that a majority, or in this case, a supermajority of people support, many times it's not the sheer amount of support for a bill that moves people. It can be one story. And so this is an example. There's a couple in Minnesota whose baby Blair died at 31 weeks of pregnancy. Several days after labor and stillbirth, Ashley, the pregnant parent, was expected to go back to work in the Minnesota courts. Ashley and her husband, John, testified in almost every committee to ensure that the paid family medical leave program would cover 12 weeks of paid leave for pregnancy, which includes stillbirth. The Kennedy's story, whose their family and their experience with pregnancy and childbirth was different from many others, and of many others who were, also testifying in support of the program. And their story really helped legislators understand what many other families need, that leave related to pregnancy and childbirth needs to be there for all pregnant people, no matter their birth outcomes. And with that, I will turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Jared Caceres, and I'm the Communications Manager for the California Work and Family Coalition. The California Work and Family Coalition is a statewide alliance of organizations, individuals, nonprofits across California, united in the belief that all people should have the time and resources to care for themselves and for each other. Next slide, please. So first, I'd like to start off by talking about the landscape of California. So while California is filled with diverse, chosen, and multi-generational families, our paid family leave laws do not reflect that. We have the largest LGBTQ population in the United States, and we also have the second highest percentage of extended families living in multi-generational households. As Serena has stated, like a lot of LGBTQ people often have to rely on close friends or chosen family to support them in times of need, and are less likely to rely on their biological family or a partner to support them when they need care. And for multi-generational households, it's important to support them, as the reality is a lot of people live with aunts, uncles, cousins, and relatives, and those people would need to take time off to care for those relatives when they're sick. Many immigrants as well have to leave their country of origin and leave their biological family behind and rely on the communities that they build and form in California as well, and a narrow family definition excludes them as well. Next slide, please. So to take leave in California for caregiving, there's really like two parts of the pie. There's wage replacement and job protection. Wage replacement is our paid family leave program, and workers could pay into the program and can receive partial wage replacement for caregiving, to care for a seriously ill family member, as well as for bonding and for other reasons as well. For our job protection, it's the California Family Rights Act, and it's folks can take unpaid job protected leave up to 12 weeks, and their employers must guarantee their job or a comparable job when they return from that leave. Currently, the bill that we worked on and passed in 2021 or 2022, AB 1041, ensured that Californians could take their California Family Rights Act caregiving leave to care for a designated person who can be a member of their chosen and extended family. This, however, is only unpaid but job protected leave. This was super important because before this law was passed and was enacted, you could only take sick leave for children, spouses, domestic partners, parents, grandparents, grandchildren, parents-in-law, and siblings. This narrow definition really disproportionately left out caregivers and the LGBTQ community, immigrant communities, people in the aging communities. So as like people age, they often have to rely on their own like care networks and not their families that might have passed or are no longer with them or around them, and also people that live in multi-generational households. All these groups are often more likely to rely on people outside of that current narrow definition of family members. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to show a video featuring Yvette Cervantes, who has been an advocate for AB 1041 and our current bill, AB 518, and been a crucial advocate for her chosen family and inclusive paid leave in general. And you can play the video.
I was hungry for acceptance, for love, for someone who would love me for me. Coming out as transgender and saying I'm not female, my family was not okay with it, and I really didn't want to lose my family. You know, I didn't want to lose my parents. I just figured I'm never gonna have this again. Hi, so good to see you. Yvette filled a really big void in my life that I never thought would be filled. We have a mother-son relationship. She just really took over that role and just really claimed me. You're my kid, you're my child. Throughout my transition, I've had many surgeries, and for the last gender-affirming surgery, it was a pretty major one, so I needed the support. Yvette couldn't take any time off of work. I'm not her biological child. I am her chosen child. She is my chosen mom. In my recovery, I was noticing things weren't right. I was calling and texting Yvette just like I don't know what to do, and come to find out, I was going into sepsis. I wasn't okay, and I did not have anyone there for me. If Yvette had been able to take time off from the very beginning, she never would have allowed it to get as bad as it did, where I was admitted into the hospital for a week.
Not knowing, and as a parent, one of your biggest things is you want to make sure that your child's okay. And me sitting at work and trying to figure out what's going on was one of the most difficult things to have to go through.
I should be able to say, Yvette, I need you. Yvette, I'm really scared.
I needed to have that ability just to stop what I was doing and get to you and make sure that you were okay. I can't imagine not having you in my life.
Yvette couldn't be there. With the way the laws are and the way current legislation is, she can't take time off work because I'm not blood family. And this is a really big gap that needs to be filled in order for our community to not only live a healthy life, but to live a long-lasting life.
Yeah, so when we presented this like webinar back in February at the Creating Change conference, that video and Yvette being there as an advocate to share her story was one of like the most impactful things that we shared during that presentation. And I think that kind of shows the impacts of storytelling. In our graphics that we used for AB 1041, we had a lot of statistics that highlighted like how widespread and the issue is for the LGBTQ population in the United States, but we also highlighted stories from advocates as well. we have the one in the bottom left, where an advocate, Milo, shared how they depended on their friends to recover from top surgery and expressed that they want every worker to be able to receive the support from their chosen family as well. And something that like we found was that when we share personal stories with legislative offices and lawmakers, it really resonated with them. It really showed how the issue really affects everyone. And when we shared our struggles and how narrow the laws were, they kind of reflected on how it would affect them and how they wouldn't be able to take leave to care for some of the people in their lives that they want to. And in that workshop that we presented, like we started off with an icebreaker question of who was the last person who provided care for you and who's the last person you provided care for. And some of the answers were really like moving. So a lot of people, since it was an LGBT conference, had to rely on their chosen family. And we also had one person say that they couldn't rely on their partner for care. They have to look, while they are married, they have to look elsewhere to really get that support from like their care network. And we really need laws that like reflect those care relationships to be passed in California. Next slide, please. So what's next? Well, in California, you could take CFRA leave for your chosen or extended family. You still can't take paid family leave for caregiving and receive wage replacement for your chosen family. So next slide. We are currently working on AB 518. So workers can take and afford to care for their chosen family and their loved ones when it matters the most. With rising cost of living and just the reality of a lot of people in California, you can't afford to take unprotected or unpaid leave to care for your loved ones. You really need wage replacement. And so that's why we're working on AB 518, so that way people can really afford to take leave when they need it. Next slide. And if you're in California, advocate with us. We have a QR code that's up here and will be sent out. It'll take you to a sign-on letter that's addressed to the California governor and the legislator. And sign on and advocate for paid family leave for chosen family. And thank you so much. I'll pass it back to Cassandra.
Sorry, struggled to find my unmute button. Thank you so much, Jared. And I'm actually going to hand it over to Serena really quickly to go over a couple of resources before we open it up for Q&A.
Yeah, so this slide is definitely a relic of when we did this presentation in person. So this QR code might or might not work on your screen. But I don't know if I have access to send the landing page to the chat. But if you go to thisismyfamilyusa.org, in the top right corner, there's a button that says Partner Toolkit. And if you click through there, we have some free communications resources that we developed as part of the campaign that you can use in your own comms work, share with others. We have some good sample social content, sample newsletter and email language, and more. And the password is case sensitive, capital P, paid leave for all 2022. So I hope you get the chance to both explore the campaign and watch through all of the videos, but also to look at some of these resources that we've made available. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions at all about getting involved with the campaign or using any of these materials. Oh, and also we have some resources from A Better Balance here on this last slide and from California Work and Family. Just to intro the ABB resources, we have our free and confidential legal helpline listed at the top. You can either go to abetterbalance.org/gethelp, which you'll also see on our main page, or call 1-833-633-3222 for any and all questions about your workplace rights. We also have a Know Your Rights Hub with a breakdown state by state of protections, not just paid family and medical leave, but all kinds of stuff. And I'll pass back to Jared to talk about the California resources.
Yeah, so and we have the resource hub, and you could the resource hub is there for people that want to take California paid leave. We break it down into topics that would suit your situation, like paid family leave for parents, paid family leave for caregivers, or even if you're taking paid leave for your own serious health condition. And we have resources from our coalition members that will help you navigate your paid leave journey.
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much. And just as a matter of house cleaning or housekeeping rather, for folks who are joining, just know that we will be sending all of these resources later this week, as well as a recording of this webinar, in case that would be helpful. And Serena, I am hearing from attendees that the QR code works, so thank you so much. At this point in time, I would love to open it up to any folks who are joining us today to go ahead and drop any questions in the chat. And while you're doing that, I'll go ahead and kick us off with a question that we had talked about a little bit beforehand when Family Values at Work and a Better Balance started to think this through as a webinar. So for any of the panelists that are here today, and Jennifer as well, I know you have some thoughts here too. Obviously, understanding from all of your presentations today, these things don't happen overnight. Paid leave laws do not just get enacted overnight. It takes a great deal of effort, a great deal of case building, and a great deal of organizing. So I guess my question though is, what happens when legislators don't seem to resonate or care about stories that you're lifting up? Has that ever been an issue that you've encountered, and how have you overcome that?
I can jump in. I just want to flag one thing that Jared said, noting that, as advocates in California, we're talking to state legislators. Some of the state legislators started realizing, oh, wait, I've got a story too that involves, some kind of extended or chosen family that wouldn't have been covered. And I wanted to echo that experience. Family Values at Work did a fly-in where we brought in a bunch of advocates from around the country in May to Capitol Hill to talk to our Congress people. And same sort of thing. We'd be sitting in these offices in the, Capitol buildings and talking to legislative aides or to the representatives themselves, and all of a sudden they'd be going like, oh yeah, wait, this one time. And so, I don't, even for people who elected officials who seem resistant, get inviting them to tell stories about their own care lives can help, jog some of those memories and maybe reinforce the stories that you're bringing to them as well. But also I want to note that, not the legislators aren't our only audience. And we've all had that moment of, being in a hearing as advocates where someone tells this absolutely heartbreaking story where you think, wow, the earth just moved. We are going to win this thing, because who can say no to this mom who's, holding her baby and talking in the microphone? Like, we all have been there, and then they still do it, So you think, wow, you must be rocks with no feelings. But those legislators are not the only people in the room, and they're not the only people who are hearing our stories. So we do need to keep telling our stories so that the media hears that, for people in other movements hear these stories. We want allies across movements to support our work, to make sure that everybody's family is included in public policy, whether that policy has to do with immigration rights or LGBTQ rights or gender justice or whatever it might be. We want folks to hear our stories across movements. So, the media's listening, voters are listening, right? So there's a lot of different audiences that aren't just trying to get through some thick-headed legislators sometimes.
Yeah, I think also just the cultural change element that you've mentioned can be powerful, even if you're not necessarily getting through to specific lawmakers. Maybe you're getting through to their constituents and to voters, and as you've mentioned, to the media. And so I think grassroots advocacy can also be really powerful in that way, and a really powerful way to build up pressure, even if it's less direct and sometimes less short-term than getting through to specific lawmakers.
Super helpful. Any other thoughts from any of our other panelists? Okay, we do have one more question. After laws with inclusive family definitions are passed, what's the role of storytelling? Is it important for implementation and education?
Yes. I think so. I mean, so we're just at the beginning of the, implementation journey, but anticipate, I mean, it was a, huge resounding success to pass it this year. But I think we're prepared for and anticipating folks maybe trying to tweak things around the edges starting in 2024. And, we're going to need to protect the bill that we passed. And so, the work isn't over. I wish it was, but it kind of never ends. We will need to protect it at the legislature, and especially if the balance of our either chamber changes in the next election, it could really face some threats before it's actually up and functioning for folks. So I think the storytelling continues, and also in the process of working with the agency as they're developing it and being engaged in that, rulemaking process. Stories retain their importance and their power to really illustrate, specific scenarios. And I think those, specific scenarios and experiences people have had are just impossible to argue with in a way that, theoretical scenarios and are too easy to argue with. And so, we certainly see that too. And even in committee and testifying, it's like, our storytellers really, got questions or really got pushed back on by legislators, because what are they going to say? Like, their experience is their experience. And it's a lot easier to argue or spin scenarios. So I think, stories are incredibly important and valuable.
Yeah, that makes me think about the Rhode Island example. So Rhode Island passed a paid family leave law, and it had a deadline, speaking of implementation, where, you had to file your application for your paid leave within a certain time after a birth if you were filing for, paternal or parental leave, excuse me. But they were finding that the state agency that issues birth certificates was not issuing birth certificates within that window. And so no non-birth parents were being allowed to take parental leave because they couldn't prove on paper that they were the parent of this new baby that just got born. And so it was the stories of mostly fathers who were going to the implementing agency and saying, hey, look, I want to be there for my family, and you're not allowing me to do that. And so that changed how the implementation happened after they had that first kind of false start.
Oh yeah, I'd like to agree. In California, as we are working on our implementation for our laws, when we do have meetings with the government agencies and share stories, I think it's so important to have stories and having like a large amount of stories. So that way, when we're talking about barriers, they can't just be like, that's just one person. We need to have a wide amount of stories. So that way it shows like the systematic failures to support everybody. And that way we could continue to improve our systems and really make sure that our paid leave program is accessible and inclusive to everybody that needs to take it.
Yeah, and similar to the point about implementation, this is not a paid leave example, but we at A Better Balance, we played a leading role in passing the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, which is a new federal law. And we recently submitted a very lengthy comment and also drove a lot of 8,000, I think, comments to the EEOC on proposed regulations for that. And a big part of our comment was sharing dozens and dozens of stories from workers who've experienced pregnancy discrimination firsthand, and saying, these are the real people who need this law. This is how it needs to meet their needs. Like, these are the stakes. And I think that was especially powerful in that process. And also just in education and outreach and making sure that workers know about these laws. I head up A Better Balance's Community Advocates program, where we connect workers who come through our helpline with chances to share their stories, oftentimes to fight for the passage of these laws, like testifying before Congress, speaking to the media. But also a lot of our advocates are really powerful in sharing like know your rights materials, because they work with people who need similar protections. Their families might also need protections that they have been denied. And so just in sharing their own stories and in using their own networks to share those resources, that also is a very powerful application of storytelling to get the word out and to say, like, did you know there's this new law? This experience that happened to me doesn't have to happen to anybody else living in this state because now we have this program. And so I think in that way, it's also very powerful.
And that's another audience, right? The agencies that are implementing these policies, they are a really important audience for our stories.
Thank you so much for lifting that that context up, Serena. That's super helpful. And you know, just to further emphasize all of the great points that everyone has already raised, I know that in Colorado, for example, LGBTQ and disability communities were especially helpful in ensuring that the rules there were as strong as could be on the family definition front. So very important always, storytelling even post passage. I think that was it for our questions. So I just want to give any of the panelists a moment to say any final remarks before we go ahead and close out for the day. Okay, well, thank you so much. It was great to have you all with us. We really appreciate this conversation. And thank you so much to all of the folks who joined us today. Bye.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.